Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Craig Wiesner, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. I welcome you today on behalf of First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto, where I've been blessed to know Dr. Rickford for decades, and on behalf of my husbands and my shop, Reach and Teach Books, Toys, and Gifts in San Mateo. You can purchase Dr. Rickford's book at reachandteach.com/soul. You'll find a link to that in the chat. And if you would like to have it signed and inscribed, just give that information in the comments when you check out, and we'll get that done for you. After a brief introduction and one question from me, I'll turn things over to Dr. Rickford to share a bit about how his book came to be, the structure of the book, and selected pictures and reading. After that, we'll open it up for questions and answers from you. So please, for now, stay on mute until I call on you during the Q&A. I've known Dr. John Rickford best through the many prayers he has shared over the years of joy and prayers of intercession for his big and beautiful extended family, his colleagues, friends, and our world. John has had an incredible career as a linguist, professor, social justice advocate, and writer. He's been at Stanford since 1980. One of his most treasured work projects was the book he co-authored with his son, Russell, Spoken Soul: The Story of Black English. The title of his memoir, which we'll hear about today, Speaking My Soul, is a bit of a play on that treasured work. Dr. Rickford was just recently inducted into the National Academy of Sciences, which he considers the academic highlight of his life. You'll learn much more about Dr. Rickford's life as he presents from his memoir, but I wanted to share this, especially on a day when our nation is once again reeling from terrible violence against people of color because of their race. John, to me, represents something that many of us might find hard to understand. How is it possible for someone to experience pain and suffering inflicted by the worst of humanity, yet live a life with boundless compassion and love, dedicated to bringing out the best of humanity? John Rickford has lived his life proving it's not just possible, but beautiful, and he inspires me to do the same. So, Dr. Rickford, John, that leads me to my one question to kick things off. What is your dream right now for the world? What the world will be like for your great-grandchildren? And you can go ahead and unmute and start your presentation. I'm gonna get you to unmute first. We get John to unmute and then we can hear him. There we go.
Okay. Yeah. Well, my dream for a world would be one in which we aren't beleaguered by racism and by hate and by prejudice. America in particular is such a wonderful country. I came here seeking a better life, and I've received it in many ways, but there are still ways in which my children, my grandchildren feel the effects of prejudice and prejudgment. So I hope that, I dream that the world will be a better place for all of them and for everybody else. I pray that we will, while we have wonderful ways of saving life, and my first chapter, my prologue talks about that. You know, I'm alive from my stroke because I was here in America. We also need to avoid ways of taking life. And I could give many, many examples, but I'm reminded of something I read years ago about a woman in San Jose, a Vietnamese woman. Some of you may remember this, it was 2003. she was having an argument with her husband, and the police were called, and she had a vegetable peeler, Vietnamese vegetable peeler, and she brandished it at the cops, and they shot her. She was dead in an instant. There are so many cases like this, and of course they gave the family $1 billion. We'll see later on they regularly do that, but at the same time they don't accept any responsibility. So anyhow, I can go on too long to talk about ways in which I'd like to see us preserve life and value life, especially these days of women and children, as I've noticed that they have moved more and more into the realm of women and children being victimized. So I wouldn't go on anymore to say that I dream of that world, and I believe the United States can be a leader in taking us to that kind of ideal world.
Thank you.
What I'd like to do is begin by talking about my book a little bit. So, oops, not working. No, I can't. Okay, it looks as though my screen is frozen. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Craig and Derek. So you can see from this the structure of my book. I have the prologue and the epilogue highlighted in red, and I'm going to read sections of that. But you see the other chapters. I'm not going to list all of them, but roughly about half of them are set in Guyana, where I was born and grew up, and about half of them are set in the USA, or in some cases in the UK or South Africa. So let's see the next slide. Next slide, please. Greg.
So I can share my screen instead.
Okay.
I need you to stop sharing yours and I can share mine.
Okay. Stop share. Okay.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and share mine. Let's do that. There we go. Are folks able to see the map of Guyana?
Okay. Yeah, I can't, but
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, good.
okay, I got it. I got it. Okay. Yeah, that's where I grew up. In Guyana, which is bordered by Venezuela, and so in Brazil. Next slide. Okay, the next slide. I begin reading from the prologue, which I call The Gift of Stroke. It happened on September the 10th, 2019, exactly 50 years after I sent Dad a last letter from Santa Cruz, California, that he would never receive because he died 4 days later of a stroke at the age of 56. 2 of my 3 brothers have since died of strokes. Peter in 1995 at 55, and Edward in 1998 at 63. Now, 6 days later, before my 70th birthday, was it to be my turn. I was working 7 days a week to clear out my office at Stanford University. I was retiring after almost 40 years in the linguistics department and was overdue to vacate my office. Suddenly, it felt as though my words didn't sound right. Though I was only too familiar with the symptoms of stroke, weakness in arms or mouth, change in vision, change in speech, droopy mouth, I opted to send my doctor a non-urgent email. I said I seemed to be experiencing a few symptoms besides slurred speech. My eyes hadn't been as sharp recently, but isn't that just a function of age? Within an hour, my doctor called my wife, Angela, and told her to get me to the emergency room right away. And he said, I reinforce advice that you should be seen in the emergency room. This could be a relatively minor stroke on its way to becoming a major stroke. During the next several hours, I entered Sanford Hospital with Angela by my side, underwent 2 CT scans and an MRI, and was admitted to intensive care where doctors worked assiduously to lower my blood pressure. I suffered from blood pressure all my life. In the end, I had 4 IV ports, 2 in each arm, including a very painful one in an artery. They did bring my blood pressure down to an acceptable level, and I fell asleep. But when I woke up, I had virtually no speech. I tried to talk to Angela, but only muffled noises came from my mouth. I cried, something I rarely do, and I cried again the next day as my children came to visit me from Crestline, Hayward, and LA in California, and Ithaca in New York. That second day in hospital, I had an angiogram, which involved the introduction of a radio-opaque substance through an artery in my groin, transported to my brain through an artery. It showed significant narrowing of the arteries in my brain, but it was too risky to attempt widening them by balloon angioplasty. For as my stroke and vascular neurologist, Dr. Neil Schwartz, explained, one misstep and it would be lights out. I also had to endure an MRI with 8 in the evening. The ordeal triggered my claustrophobia, a condition that stemmed from having been confined by a nun to a school closet at age 4 or 5. The hospital gave me a sedative to calm me down, and MRI operators told me I could squeeze a ball if I needed to come out. I squeezed it 3 times as the machine cranked out the most hideous radio frequencies. It sounded like a voodoo ceremony. Well, they did put me out each time, but they were increasingly impatient and pushed me back in as soon as possible, complaining that I would ruin the entire MRI. The MRI revealed that I had suffered 5 ischemic strokes on the left side of my brain, hence difficulties with my speech, some of which still remain, by the way. Angela stayed with me night and day, sleeping uncomfortably in 2 chairs propped together. By the way, that's the kind of thing they wouldn't allow now. This was before COVID. My children and grandchildren held a small celebration in my hospital room on September the 16th, my 70th birthday. One of the most helpful visits was from my emeritus faculty colleague, David Abernethy, who many of you know, on day 3 or 4, when I was bemoaning my situation. He told me about another faculty member whom we both knew who had had a stroke and had been paralyzed on one half of his body for more than a year. That prompted me to look around the unit and notice individuals who were much worse off than I was. Like the 8-year-old boy with his mother next door who cried, "Ma, ma," every few minutes. He appeared to have had a traumatic head injury. Or the guy whom I called my stroke mate because he had his stroke just 2 days after mine, but still couldn't speak. Or the many others like him I met at the Santa Clara County Rehab Center, where I spent another 12 days in therapy. Taking notice of these patients prompted me to count my blessings and to see my stroke as a gift with some deeper divine purpose. The one big thing I wanted to do before it was too late was to write a memoir to share with my family and friends, and maybe more widely. I had already planned to take a Stanford Continuing Studies course called Fast Draft Your Way to a Complete Memoir, taught by the novelist and memoirist Rachel Heron. And although I was still weak and recovering at the Santa Clara County Rehab Center, I asked the administrators to let me go to the initial class meeting on September 23rd. Angela drove me and stayed with me throughout the 3-hour class. That course, with about 20 students, was informative and inspiring, and is the reason I have this book to share with you today. Okay, I'd like to share a bit of reading from the epilogue, which I call The Gift of Love. This memoir chronicles my upbringing in Guyana, South America, and the major transformations that accompanied my coming to America to study in 1968. Switching from literature to linguistics, and from a colored identity to a Black one. In closing, I want to note how these transformations have been extended in love for our 4 children, Shiama, Russell, Anakela, and Luke. First of all, as examples throughout this book demonstrate, switching to linguistics did not deprive me of my love of literature, especially poetry. My children inherited the poetic muse too. The following poem from Cornell professor activist Russell, written many years earlier, reflects his love for me and the joy we shared flying kites in his youth. It is a tender account of a moment that transcends place and time. Indeed, he recalls my own father's meticulous crafting of kites for his children and the exuberance of flying with them on Easter Monday. So, runner-up. Can you show the next slide? So, this is from a reading I did at Cornell, and I asked Russell, in fact, to share this, to read this poem, and he got it and he said it by heart. Here's the poem, Runner-Up by Russell John Rickford. I raced my father, him in dashiki, cracking, sandaled feet, corduroys, smelled like old books. When he caught me in piano hands, dragon green eyes, laughing through his beard, scraping me breathless until we went flying again, us together below impatient kites. Skip a few pages. On her daughter's 46th birthday, June the 2nd, 2019, Miles Hall, the 23-year-old son of her Black college friends, Scott and Ton Hall, was shot dead by police in Walnut Creek, California. He had met Miles and his parents at an earlier party in Shiama and Neil's home. Apparently, Miles was having a schizophrenic mental health episode on June the 2nd, but in the words of the Halls' experience, the Walnut Creek police responded to our call for help with lethal force. On a sunny afternoon in our quiet neighborhood, the Walnut Creek police shot and killed Miles within a block from our home before making any efforts to de-escalate the situation. I should mention en passant that usually when they called the police, they had 2 women who would come out and were very helpful. But these 2 women were not available that day, and other people came who had a different attitude. So Shiama, a public affairs director at Kaiser, who had been most influenced by race theorist Kimberly Crenshaw while doing her JD at UCLA Law School, sprang into action, fighting for justice, love in public. Writing to friends of Scott and Dawn in June 2019, she noted that the video of Miles' horrific last moments in the reckless hands of Walnut Creek police officers was released 2 days ago. I had to will myself to watch it, and it took until the wee hours of the evening to do so. The action that she did take was to co-found FOSAT, Friends of Scott, Alexis, and Ton Hall, a grassroots organization that later became a Facebook group, the Lobby for Justice. Next slide. Oh, sorry, next slide. So, yeah, this is Justice for Miles Hall. This flyer sits among our roses at the front of our driveway. The group began attending monthly Walnut Creek City Council meetings en masse, created yard signs, and lobbied the DA to press criminal charges. Today, FOSAT has swollen from 8 to over 500 members, and State Assembly member Rebecca Bao Kahan, District 16, has introduced AB 988, the Miles Hall Lifeline Act, to create a new 988 phone line to provide a better response for individuals in crisis who need help from mental health professionals rather than untrained police. In September 2020, the city of Walnut Creek agreed to pay $4 million. Again, this is the practice thing that happens over and over. They pay some money, but it did not admit to liability or fault by city employees. On May 27, 2021, as this memoir was being finalized, the Contra Costa District Attorney's Office announced that the 2 police officers who shot Miles Hall will not face charges, a decision that made national news headlines on CNN and NBC. Nevertheless, the Hall family and FOSAT are not about to go to fight. They held a rally on the same day. The Hall family and FOSAT plan to lobby the California Attorney General to review the local district attorney's investigation of the case. As the cases of Trayvon Martin, as I discussed in chapter 16, and so many others testify, the lives of people of color do matter, and we need justice. In the words of Cornel West, justice is what love looks like in public, just like tenderness is what love feels like in private. Okay. Now I'd just like to show some other slides that were things that came up of great significance. One of the books that I use, again recommended by my son, Russell, was the Ada Blaze book, One Drop, Shifting the Lens on Race. Next slide. Yeah, these are some of the mixed race individuals in the book whose stories appear in the Ada Blaze book, One Drop. And there are historical reasons why in America, having one drop of black blood, in a sense, made you black and made you subject to being a slave, even if your father was white. Next slide. This is me when I was about 8 years old, smiley me, about 8 years old. Next slide. I was Smiley Angela, about the same time, but I didn't know her at the time. I don't want you to think that we started dating when we were 8 years old. Next slide. One of my chapters deals with a monkey and a marmoset. I had this marmoset monkey who lived in the cage. I got him from people along the corner, and he lived in the cage with a bunny rabbit. Next slide. Now these two, even though they were quite different, spent all the time together. I describe it in detail. They would snuggle up with each other, go to sleep, and then, you see it spring across the cage and so on and so forth. But one day, he got bitten. My marmoset monkey was outside, and he got bitten by my dog. And as it turns out, he died. He used to hold on to my head very tight, and I would ride, and he'd shake his head. He loved the wind. And he went to the vet, and he didn't come home because his injuries were that severe. What happened afterwards is that my rabbit refused to eat. I would go all over and get the best grass I could for him, the best zeb grass, but he wouldn't eat. And actually, about 4 days later, he died essentially of a broken heart. It was a remarkable and powerful experience for me as a youth, and to some extent, it shaped my life in many ways thereafter. Next slide. These are my paternal grandparents, my father's parents, Donald Howard Rickford and Millicent Beatrice, were the first 6 of their 10 children. You know, we had big families in Guyana. I'm the last of 10, and my father was also the last of 10. And my father, Russell Rickford, is the taller of the 2 boys at the right. Next slide. This is my DNA results. Was done by 23andMe and by Ancestry.com. And I compare these with the DNA results of my Aunt Jean Money, who comes to church, by the way, every Sunday with us. And you can see that my African element was about 34, 33%. My East Indian element was about 13%. My Amerindian element was 3%. And my European element was about 48 or 50%, which is, by the way, exactly what Henry Louis Gates of Finding Your Roots frame has. Next slide. This is my Aunt Bunny in the middle here, with some of my cousins who live in Washington, D.C. In fact, I was with them 2 weeks ago in Washington, D.C. Next slide. This is my mother. Around 1959, when I was around 9 or 10, you can barely see me at the right. She used to read for me from Samuel Selvon's wonderful book, The Lonely Londoners, a novel that was rich in Trinidadian Creole English. Who tell you my name and address, Moses said. We get it from a fellow named Jackson. Jackson's a bitch, Moses said. He know that I stay in hell myself, you know. So all those highlighted words represent elements of the Creole, not inflected as they do in English. So it's interesting because in some ways, my parents used to tell me, you know, you must speak properly, meaning English, but they themselves were using Creole, and my mother clearly loved reading from this book and other books. Next slide. This is my dad with my brother Peter, who I talk a little bit about in the chapter. Peter had clearly had some form of polio in his youth, and he would walk rather than run, rather than drive. He never went beyond high school, never went beyond elementary school. So he's a very interesting character in our family. Next slide. This is Angela and I when we were I just graduated from our high schools, Queen's College and Bishop High School. I look pretty much the same now, don't I? I'm sure. Not quite, but we started as high school sweethearts and have been married for nearly 51 years. Next slide. This is my friend, John A. Gard, who was very famous in England as a poet. He was receiving the Queen's Award for Poetry from Queen Elizabeth at Buckingham Palace in March 2013. And I have a whole chapter talking about a time when we were taken to the police station because neighbors had thought that we were trying to steal some fruit from a garage, from some trees in the backyard of a magistrate. So you have to read that to understand why it was so important and traumatic for me. Yeah. Next slide. This is Angela and me. She's pregnant with Anna Kayla in Guyana with our oldest daughter at the time, Shyama. Russell, he looks a little different than he did in that earlier picture, has more hair on his head. And she's pregnant with our third child, Anna Kayla. Next slide. And this is our family in 2016, just before our 45th wedding anniversary. As you can see, it has proliferated in wonderful ways. Next slide. This is us in San Francisco at the beginning of the infamous summer of 1969, which I think I spent a whole chapter on, or part of a chapter. Because why was it infamous? Well, we went to LA and we did not have green cards. We were not permanent residents or US citizens at the time. So that when we got offers for jobs, we couldn't produce a green card. And it was really an incredibly tough summer. We did not have much money. We would watch people eating hamburgers and watching the juice coming out of their mouths and just long for those days. But it was a very useful experience because it taught me to have increased compassion for people who had nothing. Next slide. Oh yeah, this is from that summer. I worked at the gas station for a while. I didn't know what I was doing. I'm on the right in this picture. I remember I think I put motor oil in the transmission of somebody's car. My friend Keith became a big scientist shooting lasers at objects in space. It's funny because the manager only hired immigrants who were not permanent residents, and he paid us below minimum wage. And back when I left, I don't think he gave my final paycheck. Yeah. Yeah, I'm interviewing playwright August Wilson at Stanford, 1999, about his realization that he had to put the voices of Black people in his plays. You know, he wrote Fences and 10 other plays, each based in a different decade of the 20th century, to make them come alive. Next slide. This is from the Sea Islands of South Carolina, where I spent a quarter on the Fusky next to Hilton Head Island when I was a student. And I went back also with Angela later on, and I spent another quarter there. It was a very important experience to me in many ways. And I have an entire chapter on that called Dashiki in Suitcase if required. Next slide, please. So here am I with Frank Smith. He was the guy who went out to the Fusky with me and other students in Beaufort County in South Carolina. Our mentor, J. Herman Blake, who was eventually a provost at Santa Cruz, is in the center with this red, or as my wife tells me, cerise shirt. Next slide. So here we are with Rosa Parks. In 1990, we brought her to Stanford, and it was a wonderful visit in many ways. Well, if I go into that, it would take me too far afield. Next slide, please. Here's an illustration she autographed to the Rickford family in 2/18/1990. She had promised to come back, said she would come back to Stanford sometime, but in actual fact, she didn't. But it was still a very valuable and important visit. Next slide. This is Dennis Boutus, who I didn't know about before. He was from South Africa. And here he is speaking at Stanford in 1985 about apartheid, a poet's resistance. Next slide. I am introduced to him when he gave a lecture to Stanford and Oxford group in 1990. Boutus fought hard against the exclusion of Blacks from South African Olympics. And he was shot and imprisoned next to Nelson Mandela on Robben Island. he was brought back to South Africa from, I forgot where in Europe he had been, and the police told him, "We hope you try to escape because he will try to kill you." He nevertheless thought he would make a dash for it, and they shot him, but luckily he lived. Next slide. And this is Josia Tugwane, who was the first Black South African to win Olympic gold in 1966. So basically, part of the effort of Dennis Plutus was to have the development in which both Black and white and any other color South Africans could take part in the Olympics. So he must have been pleased by this victory. Next slide. So this is a chapter on African and African American studies, and these are some of the Black faculty at Stanford in early 1980s. You can see a big afro. I couldn't have that now if I wanted, not enough here. St. Clair Drake was the first director of African American studies, second from right, and Condoleezza Rice is standing right behind him, as is Sylvia Winters standing next to me, and she was an important writer and poet who taught me actually in high school in Guyana. Next slide. Okay, this is I started leading a series of what I call learning expeditions to various places of interest in the Black world. And one of my first visits was to South Carolina. And we went to this church, African Baptist Church in South Savannah. And this guy in the middle in blue told us about these Congo cosmograms in the basement below him. Next slide. So in the basement, you see these little diamonds, okay, by all at the major posts. And actually, slaves who were coming in on the Underground Railroad would come in under an entrance from the foreshore and live actually under the church while it was in session. Is about 6 feet under the church. And these holes were like breathing holes, but they also represent a Congo cosmogram. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the Congo cosmogram is a part of the Congolese belief. It sees life as beginning on the right-hand side, and you reach your zenith in the middle. You go to the other side of this circle, and then you enter the underworld, and then you are reborn again, and you go round and round like this, okay? What was amazing to me, next slide, is that when we went to Jamaica, in Heroes Park, Kingston, Jamaica, you can see that there's the same Congo cosmogram and its elements of continuity, which is depicted on a plaque at Sam Sharp's monument in Kingston, Jamaica. Next slide. Here I am with actor Sterling K. Brown, the Emmy Award-winning star of This Is Us. He was the commencement speaker in June 2018 at Stanford, and he actually began by citing my course on African American Vernacular English and said it has helped him to respect his native vernacular. Next slide. And then here are two slides, Rachel Jeantel and Trayvon Martin. These 2012 murders, you remember, sparked the phrase Black Lives Matter. And the testimony of Rachel Jeantel was crucial at his trial, but it was disregarded because it was in such deep vernacular. So I wrote a long essay about that with a graduate student, and it's become widely known. Next slide. And here we are, Angela and I, together with Rachel Jontel, seated next to Angela Rickford. These are parts of Rachel Jontel's supportive family who helped her in many ways. She's a wonderful speaker of African American vernacular English, and she also speaks Haitian, also speaks some Spanish, because her father is from the Dominican Republic. But she was really vilified in many ways, and she was unable to read. She wasn't a very good reader. So I talk about all that in great detail at the end of the book. I think that's the end of the slideshow, right? Yeah. Okay. I don't think there are any more slides. So I think I've tried to give you an overview of the whole book, and I'd be happy to take any questions that any of you might have about any aspect of it. Okay.
All right, so the way it'll work is if you happen to have a question you'd like to ask Dr. Rickford, use your reactions button to raise your hand. You can also turn on your video and wave your hands around, and I will see you doing that. I just want to share before we start the questions. I had a customer in the shop today, Dr. Rickford, and as she was looking around, I asked her, "Do you need any help?" And she said, "I'm good." And because of your book, I knew that she meant no. So thank you for that. All right. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand unless you're good. I'm looking for raised hands.
Let me see.
Don't be shy. I see Evan Hughes. Go ahead and unmute and please ask your question.
I had a question about your coming to write the book and finding a publisher and so on. You are not a stranger to writing books. This was the first one of this type, I think. But I was wondering, how did you come to a particular publisher? And
yeah, well, Routledge had done a previous book on me. It was a complete guide to the work of John Rickford before. A kind of festschrift with articles by many former students and colleagues and teachers of mine. And they had been trying to get the publishers of Spoken Soul to give them the right to reprint it. But for various reasons, the publisher now was not the same as the publisher originally. When I first started to do this project, I thought I would just work with an agent and get another publisher. But the Routledge was interested in doing it. And in fact, it was my what do you call it, my link, the person that I was closest to, who suggested the title Speak in My Soul. So in many ways, I'm really glad that they placed confidence in me. They were a very exacting publisher. I had to provide, first of all, high quality photos. Second of all, I provided a detailed abstract for each chapter for people who might have difficulty being able to read it normally and so on. So they were very exacting, but they were very good. They did an index, a 21-page index, which you don't find in books. And they also did publish it on a kind of paper that allows you to put photos anywhere. So these are small things that you might not notice, but usually what will happen is that you'd have a centerpiece with about 4 or 5 or 6 pages of photographic paper, and you have all pictures there. But in this case, pictures are scattered throughout the volume. Yeah. I wish I could see everybody, but I can't. I can't control.
Can you do gallery view, John? You should be able to see everybody if you do gallery view.
Yeah, but I'm not. It's not working.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions? I see Holly Brady. If you would go ahead and unmute yourself.
John, I was very interested in what you had to say about the Underground Railroad and that Congolese thing. Those holes in the church floor. Is that throughout the South, or is that just in that one church? And can you say a little bit more about that? I've never heard of that before, and I'm currently doing a lot of sort of research on the Underground Railroad, so I was really interested in what you had to say.
Yeah. No, it's just in that church, in First African Baptist Church. There are other things that are really interesting about that church. There's a kind of looks like an Arabic writing on the sides of the pews. Very often in the pews, very often Black people were only allowed to go in these pews in the upper balcony. So in many ways it wouldn't be seen by the rest of the congregation. There the writing on the sides of the pews are in this kind of Arabic script. I had a student once who actually measured the depth of the earth underneath the holes, every one of the holes, and most people don't know about it, don't know about this significance of this Congolese element. But I found precisely the same situation in Jamaica, right? Both places there had been a fairly large influx of Congolese during the years of slavery.
Were the people lying down, or were they able to
No.
stand or sit, or?
About 5 or 6 feet. So they could stand to some extent. And of course, the idea is that they wouldn't be there for that long, then they move along to another spot along the Underground Railroad.
And just one other question. The fact that you were in the over in the Sea Islands, were you studying Gullah over there?
Oh yes, I've written on Gullah.
Yeah.
The funny thing about it is that my friend Frank Smith, with whom I went to the FUSP, he would say, he doesn't understand what people are saying. I would say, come on, these are Americans, these are your people. Why don't you understand? But he didn't understand because it was a Creole. So in many ways, it was very similar to Guyanese Creole in many ways. But Herman Blake, some of you may know of him. His first principle was to serve the community, so that we dug latrines, we put up fences, we did whatever people in the community wanted us to do. And any academic study was secondary. We would have to write papers for the professors for whom we were doing courses, but the first job was to serve the community.
Thank you so much, Holly. I see Leif Erikson, if you'd like to unmute.
I'm so grateful for the impact that your voice and your intellect has had on our faith community over so many years, and also the broader local community. And I'm thinking of Dr. Faye McNair Knox, for one, who was a graduate student that you mentored, who went on to be an important leader in the East Palo Alto community.
How did you know that? How did you know that? I don't think I have it in my book.
I think I knew it from her. I think she
Yeah,
was
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about the way
Yeah.
that you had mentored her. Yeah.
Yes, excellent. Yes, he died a few years ago. Yeah, well, thank you. It was great to work with her in many ways. She had to get excellent data in East Palo Alto, and she died, as I would say, prematurely because she was fairly young. Yeah.
Can you say any more about the research that she was involved in, that you were involved in with her?
Yeah. Well, we collected a lot of data from East Palo Alto, especially from adolescents and young adults. She would do a lot of the recordings herself, and it was extremely vernacular. It was interesting because there was also kind of a belief among linguists that you'd find the best speakers of the vernacular among males, males, not females. And in fact, we found the opposite, that many cases, the women and girls were in fact some of the most fluent speakers of the vernacular. But you just had to have the right kind of setting for language to come out. And she provided that kind of setting. And her daughter, her teenage daughter, was very important at the time too. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank
Is
you. I
that
see
Evan?
Evan Hughes with a question. Evan, go
Yes.
ahead.
Yes, I wanted to ask about First Presbyterian Church of Palo Alto. I did not find it in the index. I think I saw a reference to it somewhere in the book, but I couldn't find it just now. I was wondering, how did you come to be in this church and when? And was David Abernethy perhaps involved?
Well, David Abernethy was very, very important to my academic life. So for my first degree, I had a US scholarship. But I did it, I finished it in 3 years because I had some advanced standings. And beyond that, I would have to go back home. I had one of the few fellowships that would allow me to get money was a Danforth Fellowship. And it turns out that David Abernethy, whom some of you will remember, was the interviewer. So I had my interview at Stanford in his home. I didn't realize that until much later. When I came to Stanford as a professor, some years later, I was sitting in his home one day and I said, wait a second, are you the same guy that interviewed me many years ago? And he said, yes. We became very, very good friends. We went together at Stanford and Oxford. We're good friends up to today, as Margaret Fiddler and others know. We were on the American Council. How did you come to First Press? How did you come to First Press? That's a very good question. I was in England for something about, I think, 1986 or something like that. And then we were flying back to the US. And I forgot the name of the person now, but we were talking about churches with this person. And he was from First Press. And I said, it's kind of frustrating. I used to go to Stanford Memorial Church, but they didn't really have a family atmosphere because, it's just students that come in, they're there for a year or two, and then they leave. And he said, well, why don't you come and try First Press? So we came to First Press, and we liked it. And in particular, we liked the fact that it had this category of friend as well as member. And we have stayed from 1990 to now is what, 30 years, more than 30 years. So I'll someday look up and try to remember the name of the person. He no longer comes to the church, but I've stayed.
Okay, I don't have any hands. I see a hand raising on screen. Shirley Edwington. You can unmute. Jeff Grinnell, go ahead.
I'm interested in your relationship with John Agard. You mentioned that briefly during the slideshow.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could tell us anything about that.
You're going to share the Johnny and Johnny song?
But first of all, Jeff Grinnell and I, in the days when we used to meet after church and drink coffee, we had solved all the problems of the world between us from our discussions and everything. Unfortunately, those coffee things came to a halt, but we'll be back solving problems again in the future. I've forgotten what you asked about. Johnny Gard. Yeah, Johnny Gard, he was he's a poet, a very good friend, brilliant friend. It's funny, he's poets, hopefully he can't hear this. Poets are slightly crazy. And he got the same scholarship like I did. But he came up to the United States and he said, my spirit didn't take to the place. He never even went to class once. He went back home. So the guy from the US Embassy saw him and said, hey, God, you haven't left? You haven't gone anywhere? He said, yes, I went, but my spirit didn't take to the place and I came back. Well, this is crazy. $250,000 scholarship, for 4 years. Anyhow, he went to England and he became a very, very well-known poet. His poems are used in many books and so on. And as I said, he won this Queen's Award for poetry. Actually, funny thing is that his wife this year won the same award. She is also a poet. She is also Guyanese. So he's brilliant in many ways. And he wrote a very powerful poem called Half Caste, which I have in my book. So he was a very important writer and still is extremely important. And I was very privileged that he agreed to do my foreword for the book. Yeah.
Isn't there a story about your relationship in your book when you first met her?
Yeah, there's a story about, okay, so we were teenagers. This is before I met Angela. And we had gone around to this house of these two girls whom we had met at a party, and we were trying to attract their attention by the back fence. We were doing all kinds of silly things. We were singing Beatles songs and all kinds of things. And their father was a magistrate, and the neighbors thought that we were thieves, come to steal some fruit from the trees, which of course we weren't. And we looked kind of weird too. We had on raincoats, although it wasn't raining. We were teenagers, And so what had happened is that people had begun to assemble a vigilante mob in the street across from us. And at some point, we realized that we were calling out to these two girls, but they weren't responding. And so we got ready to leave. Well, at the same time, the neighbors came out with hoes and sticks, thinking we were thieves, and they were going to beat us up. But the police also came at the same time. And the police stood between them and us, luckily. And I stopped, and my friend Agard ran, and he said that them to stop or they would shoot, but they did not shoot. And he came back, and they took us to the police station, and they kept us in the holding cell there for a few hours. And luckily, one of the police sergeants in charge had worked with my father in the interior near a very famous waterfall. And he said, "You Rickford, I mean, I know your father is a decent man. Why were you trying to go stealing?" And I said, "No, we weren't going to go stealing. We were just trying to attract the attention of these two girls." And so eventually he let us out. But of course, they gave us the usual threats. If we see you again, we will lock you up and we throw away the key and so on. You know, things that terrified us as young people. So that was a joint experience that we both shared. Interesting enough, Johnny had written a calypso about it, which he sent me on my 60th birthday. And I had also written about it. So I include both of those in the book, Johnny and the police.
And so many wonderful things in the book. I really enjoyed that particular one, Johnny and Johnny. And fortunately, you met Angela, and after that, you behaved yourself.
Yes,
So,
of course.
very good. So we're hitting on 5 o'clock. If they're open it up for one more question, maybe, and let you know that you've only heard a little tiny bit of the stories that John so beautifully weaves. The book is fantastic. I really. There are funny parts and there are heartbreaking parts, and it just takes you back and forth between those. So I do encourage you to get a hold of the book.
But I would say the other thing is that, I've written many books, but they tended to be very technical books. And this book was the first book I wrote that had a very written for a general audience. Well, Spoken Soul tried to deal with a technical subject, but in a accessible way.
Yeah.
And that was because of my son's help, because he would tell me, "Dad, nobody's going to understand this." And he would break it up in another way, But this was even more general. And I hope that people will be able to understand it. And please let me know if you don't understand any part of it so that I can change it in the future.
I'm good.
Last question.
One more question from.
I'll say one thing, but I'm good.
Yes.
So in that chapter, I talked about the fact that I was asked to make a deposition to a trial, it was actually in New Mexico, in which the drug enforcement agents had come aboard a bus and they'd asked these two Black women if they could search them. And one woman said yes. And the other woman said, "I'm good," which he also interpreted as yes, because it suited him. It reminds me in many ways of this case some of you may have heard about in Delaware, where they stopped a lacrosse team in Delaware a few days ago, coming from Florida. And the cops stopped the bus and they told people that they're sure they must be carrying some kind of illegal things, drugs and so on. And they searched the bags, had pot sniffing dogs and so come on board. It was all the girls were Black women from Delaware. So there's a big hubbub about it right now because it's very unusual. So when I read about that case, it reminded me of this other case where the police were targeting Black women. What was interesting was that I'm Good, as I showed in great detail, has been increasing in frequency steadily since the 1980s. So it is now very, very common. And it's not only, it's very often used in regard to food. Would you like a beer? And you say, "I'm good." But it's not necessarily only for that. And so I provided lots of evidence showing that the prosecution's case against them was invalid. going to be crosswords and so on and so forth. Okay, I'll try to avoid getting into the linguistics.
We reduced the sentence.
Yeah. So they reduced the sentence. She only got, I think, 2 years because of a plea bargain, and the other person got longer. Yeah.
Still unjust.
Okay, last question.
All right, last question. Anybody left? Evan, I see.
Are you planning to do this in your shop when in-person meetings are possible again? Craig and John up at Reach and Teach?
It could happen. We're going to look and see what's happening in the fall. We haven't had any in-person events at our shop for a little while, but we would like to start doing that again in the fall. Or the COVID numbers need to really go way down. Derek and I are just too afraid.
Yeah,
The fall is not looking good, I'm hearing.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
But I was impressed though, Craig, by the fact that you said that any orders, you would bring them the books down to my house,
Yeah.
have me sign them, autograph them to you. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, just as long as you have a table that's as long as Vladimir Putin, so I can sit at the other end, we should be fine.
Fine, yeah, right.
So Dr. Rickford, I want to thank you so much for doing this, for writing the book, for sharing this piece of your life with us, sharing this time with us. Everybody that attended, thank you so much. And if you're not from First Presbyterian Church Palo Alto already, consider joining us on a Sunday. And if you've never shopped at Reach and Teach before, please visit reachandteach.com to see more of what we're about. Dr. Rickford, thank you. Blessings to everybody for a good week. And may we have some more peace this week than we've had the past week. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.